Okay, I have 11:20, so we will go ahead and get started with round four. And I'm the host, so I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing you to our presenter, Saundra Hensel. And you can read her bio and on the link to the EdCamp grid. So, just a brief overview: she began supporting schools as a district behavior support systems resource teacher, and she is currently the MTSS behavior supervisor for Jefferson County Schools. The session title is MTSS, which we all know is multi-tiered systems of support behavior process. So she is going to provide us with some resources and a brief overview to make sure that our students are able to meet those behavior expectations in their building. So at this time, welcome. We turn it over to you.
All right, let me quickly share my screen for you. So a lot of what this is, because honestly, trying to go through the entire MTSS behavior process in 30 minutes is, there's no way to do it. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is just lay out a bit how we try to structure our MTSS behavior systems, and then give you a ton of resources that you can utilize as you'd like to. And so Hannah Dalcourt, I'm not sure if she was able to log in. She also works with us in culture and climate behavior support as a BCBA. So I'm hoping she's able to join us today. She's primarily providing that tier 3 support to students, creating behavior plans and that sort of thing, but so is intimately involved at schools with their MTSS processes. And again, this is really the same process for behavior as it is for academics. It functions the same way. It's the same structure. So you can really look at it as both academic and behavior, but most of the resources I'm going to give you are around specifically behavior. So the first stage is always process initiation. How do we get the kiddos that we need to discuss and talk about providing additional supports? And so generally there's some kind of a referral to the team, and that can come in lots of different ways. It can be through their monthly behavior data analysis. So they're looking at their behavior data, any other kind of data that they might utilize, attendance data, that sort of thing, and identifying students that, hey, there's a concern here, maybe we should have that conversation. It might come through academic meetings. So for example, PLCs might be meeting, and a student, they keep talking and discussing this student. And so at that point, they might say, hey, let's make a referral to the MTSS team. It might be a good idea for them to look at the student's data, have a conversation, and see if we need to provide the student some additional supports to be successful. And then sometimes the request just comes directly from parent or teacher or administrator. The main thing with this is we always want to make sure that we're never using just one piece of data. We're never just going to look at referrals or just look at suspensions or just look at our universal behavior screener data. We're going to want to look at all of those things combined to really see, because especially when we have a lot of students who may need additional supports, we may need to prioritize just because we don't have the capacity as a school to really reach every single kid who might get a flag. And so we might look at it and say, okay, let's just keep an eye on this student, because yes, they popped up in terms of being at risk in this one area, but they're doing fine academically, their attendance is good. So let's just keep an eye on them and focus on some of these kiddos who might need a little more support than that. A resource that I have on here, and so the first one is that student data piece. The screenshot there, you can see all those pieces. So we have a document there you could pull and use. But then the other is guiding questions. And so I actually want to go to that and show you what these are. We had a team of psychologists, BCBAs, resource teachers, all behavior experts in the district. We pulled in special ed and said, sometimes we feel like our teams don't even know how to have those conversations around data. So how can we help them in terms of, okay, now I've got all this data, but how do we talk about it as a team? And so what we have here are the questions that we want MTSS teams and school-based teams to be talking about when they look at the universal behavior screener. And those questions may be different if we're talking about what tier supports do we want that student to get, or what interventions does that student need. And so we have it divided up, each of the questions for each of those data categories into those two questions. So you can see it covers all those pieces that were on that data sheet. And what kind of questions do we want to talk about, including the classroom environment? Things like, is it a new teacher? Is it a teacher where there hasn't been a consistent teacher in the classroom all year? We're having that problem just with staffing issues. And so a student at this point of the year may have already gone through 4 classroom teachers. Well, that's something we need to factor in when we start looking at interventions and behavior in general. So we want to look at those things: attendance, academic data. What are the questions we need to be looking at? Is there a history of past trauma? Are they receiving some outside support? Are they getting counseling outside of the school? Things like that. So again, you can access that right on this area right here. So then once we've identified the students, okay, we need to provide additional supports to these students. And this might be done by a different team. Sometimes in the MTSS world, you have the MTSS team and then the student intervention team. We don't prescribe to schools how they have to function in that way. We let them, I always say, I don't care what you call your teams, frankly. Like, you can call them your PBIS team, your culture and climate team, your MTSS team. It doesn't matter. But this is the work that needs to be done. So figure out what team is doing that work. So again, you have a team that's going to look at those students that have been identified as needing additional supports. And we're going to say, okay, what is the appropriate tier? So one thing to mention here is that we've really tried to shift the language because language is important and how we communicate about students is important. And so we've really tried to not use tier 2 student, tier 3 student. We really emphasize that it's a student who is getting tier 2 supports or a student who needs tier 3 supports because it's about the student. It's not about that tier defining them. And plus it's fluid, right? We want them to be moving in and out of those tiers as appropriate. And so saying they're a tier 2 student or a tier 3 student sounds pretty permanent, where we can say instead, right now they're receiving tier 2 supports. At some point we may determine they need tier 3, or we think they're going to be successful, like even with fading those interventions. So that language piece is important. And the other piece is that determining appropriate tier is based on data, not severity, right? We have a lot of times we call these students our high flyers, right? Well, these are my high flyers, so they must need tier 3 supports. If you don't have data to back that up, then that shouldn't be happening. You should never be giving a student behavior interventions unless you have data to support that you need interventions. So that's really important. And so as part of that, we have that entrance and exit criteria. And so here's an example of what our template looks like. Now, this is going to be different for every school, because if you have a school where kids are routinely, those high flyer kids are going to get 10, 15 referrals a month, that's very different than a school where it's unusual for a kid to even get 1 referral. So it doesn't make sense for them to have the same criteria, but there needs to be that objective criteria that each school determines based on their data. So they're going to look at their 6 weeks data and determine a cut rate. So thinking of that PBIS pyramid, right? So 5%, the top 5% in terms of number of referrals, that might be our cutoff entrance criteria for tier 3 supports. Also identified by the universal screener. Again, looking at our students, their scores, what's that top 5%? That would be our cutoff for tier 3. 20% would be our cutoff for tier 2. And so really being able to have that entrance exit criteria that will tell the school, yes, this student, we need to look at receiving tier 2 supports, or we need to look at receiving tier 3 supports. And for tier 3, it really is relying on our progress monitoring data as well. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit.
We
And
did
then,
have a question, that was
okay,
in the chat, and she wants to know, what universal behavior screener do you recommend, or screeners?
so the SRSS is great because it's free. The challenging part is that it's not online, so it's not as user-friendly. It doesn't automatically chart and graph and give you reports and things like that. We did, as a district, use Sabres, SAEBRS, through FastBridge for a year, and then we weren't able to get software approval from our IT department. And so we weren't able to use them anymore. So we're at this point back to using Sabres, and we're also using the Pearson BESS for our secondary kids. So middle school, high school, they're doing the Pearson BESS, which the nice piece about that is that students are able to do a self-report piece. And so they're able to answer questions about their own internalizing and externalizing behaviors. And I will say the Pearson screener definitely focuses more on social emotional than it does on behavior, but there are still behavior pieces in there. But so most of our schools use the SRSS. All right, so the cycle protocol just kind of helps people again figure out, how are we talking about kids every time we meet? What are we doing? And looking at trend lines. So you're going to see this again when I go to progress monitoring, but this is what really determines the movement in and out of the tiers for students. So we have to be collecting that data, that baseline data, determining what our aim is, what our trend line is, what our goal is, because that helps us determine, okay, should we ramp up and layer in a tier 3 intervention, or can we fade an intervention, or do we just need to maintain? So I'll show you that again when we get to progress monitoring, but we have them go back to this because that really gives them that guidance. If your chart looks like this, this is what your team should be talking about doing for this student. All right. So I need to get back to this.
And just to confirm, she wanted you to spell the Pearson. Is that just the abbreviation SSIS? Is that what the skill?
Pearson is the BESS, BESS. And then the SRSS is the student risk screening scale. And if you just do a search online for SRSS, it'll take you to can't remember the website. It's like CIT3 or something like that. And it has the screener that you can just download and have your teachers do. They just enter in their student roster and then indicate, and it has training videos and that sort of thing. And even will then identify those students as being low risk, moderate risk, or high risk. So again, we're looking at that entrance exit criteria. We're looking at our cycle protocol, and we're determining what the best tier placement is for that student in terms of what level of support they need. So then we go into intervention selection and implementation. And this is where it definitely becomes challenging, right? Because we tend to just have an intervention at a school that, okay, we're good at doing check in, check out. So any student who needs a tier 2 intervention is going to get check in, check out. But check and check out might not be the best intervention for a student's specific behavior. So we want to really help schools understand that they need to really determine the most effective intervention for the behavior, not just an effective intervention. Does that intervention work for that specific behavior? Then they have to determine how it's going to be implemented, how the progress is going to be monitored, who's responsible for the monitoring, and when the MTSS team is going to review the data. It's generally 4 to 6 weeks is when the MTSS team will talk about that student again and look at the progress monitoring data. So then determine a goal for the implementation of the intervention, document the plan, and collect baseline data. And so this page has a bunch of these, and this presentation is uploaded on that spreadsheet. So you can just click on the whole giant spreadsheet. You can just click on this and the presentation slides are down at the bottom. And you can download this and click to all these links as well. So there's a few of these I want to highlight. So first off, we have this document, which I think is really useful, and it lists a bunch of interventions. So you've got your check in, check out, class pass, self-monitoring, behavior contract, token economy, and all that. And then it has what a description is of that, who it's a good fit for, and then some resources to help you understand how to utilize that intervention or how to do that intervention. We also have this because we found that a lot of MTSS teams didn't really know how to write a good behavior goal. So let me make this a little bigger for you. So for example, if we have a student who is continually non-compliant with teacher directions, so the goal might be Mia will increase the percent of points earned daily for following teacher directions from 60 to 70% or more of the total points possible on 4 out of 5 days on the daily progress report across 4 consecutive weeks. So we have our baseline data of 60%. We have our goal of 70%. We know how many days they have to meet that 70%, and for how long, for 4 consecutive weeks. Now we know if Mia has met this, then we can consider fading the interventions, right? If she doesn't meet that, then we need to look at those charts and determine, okay, where do we fall on this? Is she going in the right direction? So let's just keep the intervention going. Is she not even going in the right direction? She seems to be going backwards. Well, then we might need to layer in a tier 3 support. So it lists all these different behaviors and what might an appropriate goal be. So again, sometimes the goal is decreasing a behavior. Sometimes it's increasing a replacement behavior. So like this next one, out of seat, yelling out in class, Malik will raise his hand to access teacher assistance and attention. So we're going to teach him this replacement behavior of raising his hand. And then we want to measure how frequently he's doing that. And then this is a sample documentation sheet. And so this is just something, and we also have it in a Google form so they can have it electronically. So it's just what's the intervention, what tier supports is the student going to get, what's the intervention start date. At some point we'll put in the end date when we feel we no longer need that intervention. What's the progress review date? Again, 4 to 5 weeks. The targeted behavior, our goal statement, intervention frequency, time and duration, who's providing the intervention. And then if this was at that 4 to 6 week time when we are reviewing the student's data, what's the determination? Are we going to change the intervention, fade the intervention, move to tier 1, move to tier 2, move to tier 3, or refer for multidisciplinary review? So we have lots of options. We have it in one nice form where they can keep it in a spreadsheet if they do it in the Google form as well. All right. So again, this is just a bunch of resources for you on this document here. We also have the student intervention matching form, which is the Clayton Cook model that a lot of our schools use to it just asks you some questions about the behavior and about the student. And then it helps you match what intervention might be a good intervention to address that behavior with that student. And that is progress review. And that's key. I think that's the piece a lot of times we don't give enough focus or emphasis to. We really do want all these behaviors to be, and all these decisions to be based around data, not just, yeah, it seems to be going better in the classroom. Like, and what that often just translates to is, yeah, the kid's not bugging me as much. Like, I'm not yelling at him as frequently. And that's not a good way to measure how effective we're being with students or with our interventions. So we really want that data. And so this progress monitoring is important. Again, I'm going to show you, and you'll have a link to this so you can download this document and see what it looks like. So we've got all the basic student information. We've got all their data, what interventions we're giving, what areas of concern we're addressing. This is like their academic data. And then just some documents if the student has a behavior intervention plan or an FBA, we can link anything in there. What wraparound services might the student be receiving? Are they going to a therapist? Anything like that. Here's where the team will, every time they meet to discuss that student, they can document it there. And here's where we're going to do progress monitoring and document what we're looking for. So here's an example of what a student, we have Brittany here. Here's her goal, her target behaviors, keeping her hands and feet and items to herself. And so here we have our progress monitoring data. So we've been measuring this. The teacher's been collecting incidences. And so we can see here, the blue line here is our trend line. So she's improving. The trend line is going up. Our goal line's up here though. So when we meet to talk about Brittany, we're going to say, okay, she's definitely progressing in the way we want her to, but she's not yet meeting her goal. So we're not going to want to fade that intervention yet. We're going to want to keep utilizing that intervention and then check in another 4 weeks and see if she's hitting that goal line. If she's consistently hitting that goal line, then we can talk fading the intervention. So you can see here what the conversations have been around for this student. And they checked in every 4 weeks, it looks like, so because it's monthly. So that's just a sample of what that might look like on this progress monitoring sheet. And I think that's just, again, so important to be emphasizing to your teams and to the teachers that we want to be making these database decisions.
And we do have one question, and she would like to know, did you develop these Google progress monitoring forms? And she asked if you could share the template. I know that above that, we had a few that said they tried to open a couple of the document templates, and it's not allowing all of them to be accessed. A couple of them, they have to ask for permission. And I think one says something along the lines of it's not available. I think it was under the sample behavior goals. It says, sorry, it's unable to open the file at this time.
Okay. If people send me an email, I will definitely get them access to all these, and I'll try and go in and change. I thought I'd gone in and changed all the permissions, but I'll just double check and make sure that they can make a copy. It should be asking you to make a copy of it, is what it should be doing. But if it's not doing that, just shoot me an email, and my email is on the presentation, and we'll be happy to get you any of these documents. But yes, this template, my plan was the link would get you to this document. You could just make a copy of it for yourself. Absolutely. Yeah, we are definitely always in the we will share everything mode. We didn't, the progress monitoring, I think we adapted from another district. I think it might have been, and if Hannah's on, she can maybe correct me, but I think we adapted it from something Oldham County was using with their ECE department. So again, 4 to 6 weeks, analyze data from progress monitoring, pull in any other pertinent data, looking at your cycle protocol and your entrance and exit criteria, and then determine appropriate action. This is an example of different ways the charts may look. This just comes from that cycle protocol. They're at the bottom of that. So again, on this one, the trend is similar to Brittany. The trend is going in the right direction. In this case, we want a behavior to decrease, but it's not hitting the goal. So we're going to continue that. In chart 2, trended in the right direction. Student is consistently meeting that goal. So we probably want to look at fading that intervention. Here we've got the goal line. Trend line is going in the wrong direction because we want to aim for this direction. And the student is not only trending, they're clearly not meeting the goal. So at that point, we might start considering, do we need to layer on another intervention? But then the other questions we're going to ask before we start talking, let's layer in another intervention, we're going to say, is the intervention being implemented with fidelity? And is the data being collected accurately? Because we want to make sure that those things are in place. We can't just say it's not working for this student if we're not doing the intervention correctly. So big picture, we're really trying to also emphasize that MTSS is not the pathway to ECE. A lot of times there's that mindset of, oh, we're going to do the MTSS process, then we can refer them for ECE services for special ed. That's not what MTSS is. Ideally, MTSS is actually going to decrease the numbers if you're doing it with fidelity and effectively, decrease the number of students that get referred for special ed services, because we're able to provide the interventions those students need earlier in the process, and then ensures that the only students who are referred for special ed services are ones that truly need those special ed services. And so I was an English teacher, so I like to always use literary quotes. So bringing in Ralph Waldo Emerson, where he says, it's not the destination, it's the journey. So again, that's what MTSS is. MTSS is the journey that we want students to travel, to give them the supports they need to meet our expectations around behavior. I did want to throw this into, this is an example of our MTSS implementation plan that we use. So all schools are required to do this, usually by the beginning of October. They submit their plan where they have to list all the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supports that they use. And you'll see PBIS and restorative practices on there. You'll see social emotional learning, all those things. And then we also have the components of an MTSS framework, and we have a ton of resources for our schools on there. And I'm not sure you would be able to access every one of those resources, but if you reach out to me, I'll get you a copy of that. I'm perfectly happy to do that. Or Hannah, she's on our beginning link email as well. So then some questions, just as we close, for you to think about as you're working with the MTSS team in your school or in your district, is what does the MTSS student referral process look like in your school? Do people know how to refer students to your MTSS team? Is there a clear route to do that? Does your school have specific entrance and exit criteria? And how has that been a useful tool for you, or do you think it would be a useful tool for you? What interventions have you found to be effective with your students? And what are some barriers to collecting data, and what have you found helpful in minimizing those barriers? So we only have about a minute, but if there were any other questions in the chat, I'm happy to respond.
I don't see any other questions at this time, but if anyone wants to unmute and ask any questions, we do have 1 minute remaining. I know we did have a comment that loved the resources. Thank you very much. So if we don't have any questions, then we do have a 10-minute break before we start round 5. And Saundra will be presenting in round 5, correct, in this room,
Yes.
on utilizing restorative language in schools. So if you are going to stick around for that, you're welcome to just stay here. We do have one more question. It says, do you have the PASS program? And would that be after tier 3?
We have a couple schools using PASS, not many. And that would be considered part of the tier 3 wraparound supports.
Do you have specific criteria in order to get students into pass?
You know, we have so few schools using it. We don't support it at the district level, so I'm not really sure how they utilize that. I think it's a couple of our middle schools are kind of trying it out this year. So it's not really widely used in our district.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you. All right, we'll stop our recording and take our 10-minute break.